All right,
Okay.
everybody, welcome. That was a great intro from Lucy, and I thank you all for joining us here this morning as we talk about dementia. When we think about positive change within ourselves, our communities, we need to bring about awareness. We need to open up the dialogue about changes in aging and changes in our brains as we age. So today we're going to explore as some of these ideas on what is dementia, what are the warning signs, and what can we do within our community to find support. I love that video. It just touches on the emotion of the journey and the importance of creating connection and community to support each other, whatever changes that we may be going through. So we often question, what is dementia? You know, often we hear an older person's disease or that they've gone senile. Some of these terms are so outdated and not person focused. When we look at what is dementia, it is not a disease, but a set of symptoms, and it reduces the ability to perform those everyday activities. Symptoms that we often think about are memory loss. That's kind of the hallmark feature that we see and the repetition, but it's not uniquely identified by just memory loss. There can be difficulties with attention and focus. Problem solving becomes a great challenge. Language skills, such as tip of the tongue, finding the words, or mistaken objects for different words. We have those changes in mood and behavior. Often there'll be changes and issues within the vision and balance and moving. So when I think about this set of symptoms, it could be any one of us on a day without good sleep, proper hydration. There could be so many things contributing to those brain changes. But the difference is that when it's dementia, it becomes debilitating and progressive, where it's affecting day-to-day activity. And I think as we age, we look at those changes. By the time that we're turning 50, we're seeing a decrease in the rate that we're able to process information. Our ability to multitask drastically slows. We have to now attach a lot of a memory to encode emotion. We have to attach emotion to our memories to encode them for later retrieval. By the time 65 occurs, 40% are going to have some form of memory loss. So it kind of leaves us constant question and exploring with all of the changes into aging and our lifestyle. So what are those warning signs? So memory loss that can affect our day-to-day ability. So this goes beyond misplacing the keys or not quite remembering what day of the week that appointment's on. It's memory loss that it takes away from those abilities. Another warning sign is difficulty performing familiar tasks. So it might be a meal that you've always prepared on a Sunday, a family tradition. Now, when you're starting to do something that's so familiar, you're missing the next step. What's the sequence? Having difficulty performing something that is so known to you. Problems with language and forgetting words. And this is where we look at the tip of the tongue syndrome. So, word finding, really striving to place what that word is or misidentifying words. Also, problems with processing. So, even like our brain teasers that we just heard this morning, taking time to process that silent space in between to respond. Disorientation to time and space. So often we'll see this in increased confusion to what day of the week, what month, what year, what location as the brain is changing. Impaired judgment. So often making decisions or having judgment issues that aren't typical of personality or history. Problems with abstract thinking. And this is where we'll see sometimes with finances, bill paying, and that management of that data becomes so challenging that they're not able to manage anymore. And misplacing things. How often is this where we mislocate or misplace an item, but to find it in a very unique location? Changes in mood and behavior. And of course, with all brain changes, we see that there are going to be changes with frustration levels, responses, reactive behaviors. Changes in personality might be something that you're not typically seeing of this person, and questioning and loss of initiative. So the get up and go, to be able to be the one to initiate the first step of an activity, a hobby, a task, the brain loses that ability to self-initiate. And again, when we look at these, dependent on our brain health and well-being, we may see that, history, some of our strengths, our environment, and our
Okay,
day-to-day,
here's
oh, sorry, may be affecting these. But it becomes a sign that we have to take a step forward when it's not typical aging, because dementia is not typical aging. When we look at these warning signs, let's compare them to what it is for typical aging. So the warning signs: memory loss disrupting daily life, challenges in planning and problem solving, difficulty completing those familiar tasks at work or leisure, confusion to time and space, trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships, changes in oral or written fluency, misplacing things and losing the ability to find them, to retrace those steps, decreased or poor judgment, and withdrawal from work and social activities, and those changes in mood and personality. Now, typical aging, we're going to forget names of people when we meet them for the first time, but often with some cueing or reminders, we can place those. We were never a chef, but we burnt the pie today. And that happens. We have those day-to-day distractions or focus issues or memory. We love crosswords, but we can't even begin to get this one. Yesterday, you had learned that a good friend passed away. So when we look at those emotional, so managing our mood and emotion is integral to our brain health and well-being. You're breaking your routine to go to a store one further highway exit from your home. You accidentally turn off at the wrong exit while listening to music. So that's attention and focus, a new pattern, a new routine, and you can retrace your steps and know that you had missed your stop. Issues brought about by cataracts, glaucoma, or age-related macular degeneration are not signs of dementia. As we looked at the warning signs with those changes in vision, we look at it as with our vision, we all have peripheral vision. And of course, as we age and considering our history, that changes. It might come in smaller, almost like our Zoom boxes. With dementia, those changes can be where you're seeing this out of a scuba mask. So when we think about having this reduced vision sight, think about all of the challenges that come along with that: gait, movement, even having a meal. It would be more difficult when somebody's not in that visual space. And as the brain changes, this increases to be binocular to monocular. So even when we look at dementia, and we'll visit in a little bit about what we can do to connect to our community and those with lived experience, is communicate and finding ways to be in the visual field and finding the words to support that social connection. Sometimes having issues finding the right words to describe complicated concepts. We all struggle with this, and sometimes we need a little bit of time. Sometimes we need a deep breath in order to clear our emotion, our stress, or our mind to come up with it. Sometimes we just need that visual cue. Misplacing your keys in a messy house. They say that with our brain health and well-being, the importance of decluttering and having a place for everything and everything in its place is one of the key factors for brain health. So misplacing your keys in an unfamiliar location or when your house is not organized is a part of normal aging or typical aging. Signing up for a new subscription after a convincing marketing campaign. I think we can all, no matter which age or stage of life, when there is a heavy marketing influence or a strong personality, we can often be swayed to make different decisions, not our typical judgment. You did not participate in a social activity if feeling weary, depressed, or sick. I think that we have to look uniquely at our personalities. And yes, we strive for social connection for our brain health and well-being, but it's also knowing your limitations, knowing that if you're an introvert, it is stepping back from those to restore and refill, perhaps in a forest or a treed area. But that is not a withdrawal from social activities due to brain changes because of dementia. Someone disturbs your routine and you get angry. So that is a natural occurrence, experiencing mood and personality based on situation, but we can cope, manage, acknowledge, and resolve. When the brain is changing, these become more difficult. And that's why the importance of persons coming in to create a circle of support. So when we look at typical and atypical aging, we're probably all wondering whether living with brain changes or medical conditions, what can we do to modify or reduce our risk of dementia? So those risk factors, as defined by the landmark study that came out last year in September 2022, look at the risk factors throughout life. So of course, in the early stages, we're aware that connection, nurture, education is so integral for brain health and well-being. But as midlife comes, one of the identified reducers of the risk factors are hearing. So making sure that you are having your hearing checked if there's any deficits. Look at protecting yourself, protect your head, because it also increases your risk for developing a dementia. And of course, those health risks. So looking at your medical well-being, blood pressure, diabetes, and making sure that you are regulating and checking. Alcohol misuse and obesity. So as we travel further down throughout midlife, we have to look at smoking or high risk activities or behaviors. That mood management, depression can often mimic the signs of dementia, those symptoms that we talked about earlier, and can also increase our risk of further developing cognitive changes. Social isolation. And when we experience it based on our history and personality, social isolation can increase our risk of brain changes. Physical inactivity. We need to get our bodies moving and pump our blood so that our brain is oxygenated and healthy and nourished. Another part of this study really looked at air pollution. looked at the air quality and toxins within our homes and our environments that are affecting our cognitive well-being. And of course, one of the other risk factors being diabetes as we look at the later life stages. So eliminating all of these risk factors can reduce the prevalence of dementia by up to 40%. When we look at this, we often question what we can control and what we can't control. The risk factors that cannot be changed, of course, are our age, and that is the greatest risk factor to developing our sex. So females tend to have a higher occurrence of developing dementia, but we also have females documented to live longer or later in life, as well as seek medical attention more readily, and our genetics. So when we look at what we can control, what can we change in our day-to-day life to manage our brain health and well-being? Well, like this morning, those brain games. Brain games are an excellent way to engage and connection, even virtual connection. Here, we're able to increase our socialization, talk to people, reach out, and learn together. So let's look at total brain health. You know, we all have things that we strive for, and often we fail to think about nourishing our brain, exercising our brain. So when we look at a total health and well-being model to reduce risk, we have to think about mind, body, and spirit. So the day-to-day things that we can do for our body. It might not be getting off the couch and running 5K. It's simple body movement, get our blood flowing and our brain oxygenated. We want to look at eating smart. So there's a lot of research going into different types of diets and cognitive health and well-being. One that we're exploring next week over a virtual domain is the Mind Diet. So the Alzheimer's Society has done a lot of research into making those small and sustainable changes within what we nourish ourselves with. We have to start looking at changes differently. So many of us choose change on a Monday, choose change on New Year's. And for our brain health and well-being, those changes often aren't successful or sustainable because our brain sees those kind of big changes as loss. So instead of looking at the modifiable risk factors or brain health and wellness as something that has to be taken away, try stacking your day for success. When we make small changes, and they're often more sustainable for a long term. So it might be creating a healthy morning routine. It might be taking those deep breaths in the morning and being grateful for the day, because when we shift our mind and shift our perception, we increase our brain health and well-being. Perhaps it might be once you're awake and heading out of bed, you might make the bed with extreme vigor to get that blood pumping and that brain oxygenated. There are small things that we can do within our day-to-day. Now let's move on to mind. What can we do for our mind? I think number one is manage our mood and our emotion. So many of us, as we talk about the typical brain changes, lose the ability to multitask as the brain ages. So when we start to pull in and become more intentional and more focused on what it is that we're doing, we're actually creating positive neural pathways. We're feeding our brain the right responses. When our brain becomes stressed, perhaps multitasking, emotions, conflict within our living or our work environment, or not taking enough time to nourish ourselves, it causes stress. And when we're stressed, we have more difficulty retaining information and learning and mood and management. We also want to think about our mind as something that needs to continue to be challenged. So whether it's brain teasers, whether it's Sudoku, whether it's taking on learning a new language, a new instrument, we need to continue to surprise our brain and challenge our brain to learn and new situations. Now, on the reverse role of that, Routine is very helpful for our brain to thrive and survive. So creating, again, that healthy morning routine where you're mixing in mind, body, and movement and challenging yourself in the day-to-day, which lends to the spirit. When we look at those mood management strategies, socialization, finding which way you thrive in a social situation. It might be taking a class, virtual or in person. It might be joining up with a walking group. It might be finding something within your community to invest in, to create that connection. When we put all of this together, it really, really helps with our brain health and wellness, and therefore looking at all of those modifiable risks to reduce. But what about when we see the warning signs and that we've had to reach out for help, or perhaps we're living with the diagnosis of dementia? All of these things for brain health and wellness will help anyone thrive or survive. We need to know that people in our community, when we look at over 500,000 Canadians living with a diagnosis of dementia, and I believe it's just under 4,000 in Brant County and Brantford alone. Perhaps it's about 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 persons. We are all touched by somebody living with brain changes in our families and in our communities. So we need to learn how to reduce the stigma. We need to provide connection so that people can live well with dementia. And living well with dementia means that we need to build our communities. So as with the Grand River Council on Aging and the Ontario Health Team and the Alzheimer's Society, we are striving to create awareness, to build dementia-friendly communities and spaces so that we can reduce stigma, so that people in early intervention reach out for their circle of support. Because we know that when we build this community connection and early intervention, that people can begin to thrive within their new diagnosis. So when we look at Dementia Friendly Canada, it's to train the workforce to be dementia friendly. And we do that by looking at that set of symptoms. What can we do to help people thrive within their communities and organizations? It might be looking at signage. It might be looking at lighting within the different facilities. It might be looking at finding times for reduced overstimulation, a quieter time for persons that are living with brain changes, to continue that they are engaging and connecting within their communities. The way that we can reduce stigma and bring awareness is through dementia education. So gathering here together today to look at what dementia is and how we can connect within our community to learn and to grow. When we have increased education, families can begin to thrive and develop that circle of support. Another thing that we really have to look at is that this just isn't an old person's disease. There is early onset dementia. There are over 120 different known types of dementia, and that list is growing. So when we look back to that set of symptoms, dementia is really an umbrella term that facilitates so many different brain changes, and each one is unique to that person and their medical history and the support that they have. So we have to learn to be connected, to communicate well, and to reduce the stigma of this being an aging person's disease. Along with connection, at the Alzheimer's Society and many different community organizations, counseling to help navigate who and where and how to get support. Because often when we feel isolated and alone, when dealing with such a big change, it can be so overwhelming. So finding ways to connect, through our local organizations to have the support and connection to education and others on this journey. Support groups have been so helpful in helping families and persons that are living with dementia find that connection and that community. We never want anyone to feel alone, no matter what the history, the background, the place. Connection is important in helping build resiliency and coping with any kind of change in life. Wellness. So as we speak of wellness and brain health and wellness, we often need to find ways to connect to do so. Here at the Alzheimer's Society, as well as different community organizations in Brantford, we encourage healthy living, physical, visual, cognitive health and well-being, and opportunity to socially engage while doing so. Our programs are developed for caregivers and persons living with dementia to create those opportunities for socialization. I love this statement. So as we've gone through the presentation, a lot of these little quotes are coming from persons with lived experience. And here, we don't stop living once we're diagnosed. And that's the key. When we reach out and find ways of connection, we can continue to grow and thrive. As we wound up to the end of our presentation here, the Alzheimer's Society provides so much programming, education, and connection. And this is just a brief introduction on awareness as part of a series that we are doing to create more connection and awareness within Brant County, and Norfolk County. The Alzheimer's Society has support and counseling. Our first link program is a connection for early intervention into our services, caregiver respite programs, public awareness and education, volunteer visiting programs, and volunteer opportunities. Collectively, as Lucy said when we first started, our awareness committee is a partnership with the Grand River Council on Aging, who is the voice of persons with lived experience, Brantford, Norfolk, OHT, the Ontario Health Team that is looking to identify gaps in services and create integrated family health care so that persons living with dementia can have access to services. And the Alzheimer's Society, which is Brant, Haldeman, Norfolk, Hamilton, and Halton. And we are always just a website or a phone call away to our intake department to connect with any of the services that are needed. I thank you so much for joining me here today. And please reach out with any questions or comments.